on The View From A Pew are those of Mckoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here is today's The View From A Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View From A Pew.
And thank you, Emily. I appreciate that very much. It's a Friday, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen to The View From A Pew. The underlining title of our shows always answers this question. What does the Bible say about blank? And for this last 2 weeks, what does the Bible say about the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah? And, of course, we're talking this week all around the Christmas, the birth of Christ. And we've talked about the area. We've talked about the sheep herders. We've talked a little bit about the wise men. But now we're going to get to the central truth, and that's the role of the wise men.
When Jesus came into this world, it should not have been a surprise. There were so many prophecies that were given in the Old Testament that described where the Messiah would be born, what kind of circumstances would surround his birth, what kind of role that he would have in this world. And yet, when Jesus was born, most people were totally unaware. So God chooses special individuals to be the ones that are supposed to herald this message, who are supposed to take this message in a wider way so that people will hear this announcement that the Messiah has come. It was the shepherds who saw the angels and went and then saw the Christ child that was born. They were ones that went around their community and they told others that the Messiah was here. Now you have the wise men. These are foreigners who come into the land of Israel, and they come there asking and stirring up interest about the Messiah being born. They go down and they find out that indeed he was born. They have a chance to see him and they leave their gifts. Now, the Bible doesn't necessarily say that they went out and spread this information, but you know that as they went back, there must have been many opportunities to tell the story of why they made this trip all the way to the land of Israel, and now how these prophetic passages in the Old Testament scriptures had actually come to pass, that a Messiah had been born. And part of this was to create a knowledge in this world that God keeps his promises, that the Messiah that had been foretold actually came to this world. And what central truth do we find? When we look at the story of the wise men, we see that there are foreigners who came and who understood a Messiah was to be born. What central truth does that tell us? Well, it tells us the fact that the Messiah is for the entire world. Not only, with the shepherds receiving the fact that the Messiah had been born, they understood the social class was being broken down. But not only that fact, but now when the wise men come, they're foreigners. They're not part of the people of Israel. But yet they need to know about the Messiah too. The Messiah is not just a Jewish Messiah. The Messiah is for the whole world.
But the Jews didn't want to share him.
They didn't want to share it.
They did not want the Gentiles to have anything to do with him.
They thought if he was a king, they wanted him to be their king.
Right.
Not just the king of everyone. But you remember when God first called Abraham. Genesis chapter 12. God calls Abraham and he says, Abraham, I want you to go to a land that I will show you. I want you to be my person there. And I want you to be the father of a great generation or a great lineage of people, because through that lineage, guess what? The whole world would be blessed.
Yep.
And that was when Jesus was born, and Jesus fulfills his role as the Messiah. the whole world has been blessed because now they have received the gift of salvation. And the gift of salvation is not just for the Jewish people. The gift of salvation is for all. And it takes a while for the Jewish people, particularly Jewish disciples, to really understand that. And so we see in Jesus' ministry, we see as Jesus goes around, Jesus trying to help them to understand in a greater way how his ministry is for all, how he died for the whole world. And we talked about in our last show, we talked a little bit about how Jesus fed the 5,000, which were mainly Jewish people, and then he fed the 4,000, which were mainly Gentiles, and the story of the Syrophoenician woman, and how he showed his disciples that his ministry was more than just for them. And you can continue to read in the stories of Jesus and the ministries that he had, that his focus was to help the Jewish believers understand that his role was so much greater. You might remember in the last week of Jesus' time in this world as the Messiah, before he was crucified, you might remember the story where Jesus curses a fig tree.
Mm-hmm.
That always seems strange. Jesus goes to a fig tree in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and by the way, fig trees are like oak trees. They're all over the place, and people get this for food.
And it's right, and it's okay whether the fig tree belongs to you or you're just passing by.
Yeah.
You have a right to go and to pick the fruit from the tree. So he goes to the tree looking for something to eat, and there's no fruit that is there on the fig tree. And so Jesus pronounces a few words upon the fig tree, and the next time they come by, the fig tree has dried up and is dead. Jesus is giving an illustration about how it was important for the Jewish nation. He had a purpose and a role for them to help the rest of the world understand about God and about the ways of God. And unfortunately, much of that information they had kept to themselves because they believed that it was just for them. But God had shown them. He'd shown them through Old Testament times his purposes in trying to reach the world, that all were created in his image, and that the gift of salvation is for all people and not just for some.
Yeah, we said this earlier in the show this week, that Jesus came and made all people equal. He got rid of every race that we had and simply took care of and messaged to the human race.
Well, and that's because we had built so many class structures.
Yeah.
We had said, well, this person is inferior and that person is inferior. And Jesus did away with that and showed us the value of every human soul. And you know, Mac, I think we have to be honest when we look at the Christian church and we see what the Christian church did through the centuries, and how sometimes as we shared the gospel, that sometimes there was more that was involved that ended up actually nulling the effect that we should have had in this world. It's very easy to begin to try to share our culture rather than the gospel message and the gospel truth itself.
Well, I've always said that the worst thing about Christianity are the Christians.
Well, Christians at the time of when the early church began were almost all Jewish.
Yeah.
They were Jewish who believed in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And as the church began to grow, and as Paul began to preach to the Gentiles, and Gentiles were being baptized, and they became a part of the church, Jews wanted to pass on, Jewish believers in Jesus wanted to pass on their culture to these Gentiles, and considered it wrong if the Gentiles didn't want to be circumcised. We've got a problem here. Well, Paul and the early church leaders had to work out some of these things as the Holy Spirit directed them and guided them. But still, in the world today, sometimes when we go to preach the Gospels to other people in different parts of the world, sometimes we want to pass on our culture more than the story of Jesus and the Gospel. I've had the opportunity of visiting several other countries around the world, and I tell you, the world is still vastly different in our cultural ways, the ways that we do something. And yet at the same time, wherever the gospel is preached, there are true, sincere Christians whose hearts open up and listen to the Word of God, and who begin living the Christian life, not always in the cultural ways that we might expect, but according to the culture in their circumstances, they become true followers of Jesus Christ. The story of the wise men is a story about those who happened to be listening to God when the people that were called the people of God were not listening. We're not reading the prophecies. We're not listening to something. God had to break through to these astrologers, to these wise men, and show them something, the star that was in the heavens, so that they would understand him and understand the truth that Jesus had come to this world as the Messiah that came for all men.
Gentiles, barbarians, didn't matter the color of the skin, didn't matter the language. Jesus came for everybody. And that is something that a lot of people have a hard time with because they think they're better than somebody else. You're talking to one of them right here back 20 years ago. But when we figure out that Jesus is here to share, Jesus is here to teach, Jesus is here to let the prisoners go, heal the ailments, and finally give us that amazing free gift of salvation that he gave us on the cross that day.
Mac, I think that one of the practical points from this lesson about the shepherds and the wise men is the fact that anyone can respond to Jesus. Anyone can have the blessing. The shepherds were open to listening to an angel. The wise men were open to see what God may be trying to say to them, even through a star that's in the heavens. Anyone can listen and respond and receive the blessing of God. And I think that's so important because I know there's still people that are out there that hear the message of the gospel but don't believe it really applies to them. That they're not the ones that can receive God's grace. And all the way through the story of Jesus is the picture of God extending his grace to everyone in this world. No one is cast aside. No one does not have the opportunity of salvation. Jesus came to save all.
Thank you, Pastor, and to you, thanks to DivineTruthChristian.com. It is a website where you can get anything you want concerning Jesus. This would be a good time to order something from them for all your friends and family. Have a great weekend.